King Fisher, that flashy Texas gunman who once killed a circus tiger just so he could make chaps out of its hide, boasted that he killed 37 men, not counting Mexicans. During his time as an outlaw, he had over 100 bandits riding for him as he ruled all of southwest Texas. Who was King Fisher? And where can I find a pair of those chaps? Join me as we explore all of these questions on this newest ivory-handled and bedazzled episode of Bloody Beaver Podcast. John King Fisher was born in October of 1853 in Collin County, Texas, just north of Dallas. His father, Job Fisher, raised cattle for a living, and sadly, King's mother, Lucinda, would pass away when he was just 2 years old. Either Job didn't have much luck with the ladies, or he had a little bit too much in common with his Old Testament namesake, because his second wife died as well, sometime between the end of the Civil War and 1870. The Fisher family, Job, King, little brothers John and Jasper, all moved to Goliad, Texas, and it was there that Anna, Job's mother, helped raise the kids. Only young King Fisher was turning out to be quite a handful. He was popular with the girls, which in my opinion is a bad thing for a kid. I feel like the years of constant rejection from the opposite sex that I experienced as a teenager led to me being the humble, well-adjusted, self-loathing person that I am today. And if being a teenage heartthrob wasn't bad enough, King started hanging out with a bad crowd, getting in fistfights, smoking Marlboro Reds and listening to Metallica. Nah, not really, kidding about the Marlboro Reds and Metallica. But he was a restless kid and he was hanging out with the wrong crowd. That much is true. And Job, being a single father and having his hands full, sent King off to live with his brother James. But still, that didn't stop the boy from being arrested for horse theft in 1870. The story goes that it was all just a misunderstanding and he was just borrowing the horse without the permission of the owner. He supposedly escaped from the posse with the help of the horse's owner. So kind of a weird situation. I guess the owner was pissed, but not pissed off enough to want to see the kid get into serious trouble. Not long after, he was arrested again, though, this time for breaking into a house. He burgled it, I believe is the technical term. According to the Fisher family lore, he was put up to it by an older guy. There goes that wrong crowd, bad influence thing again. And he wouldn't get off easy this time. The young burglar was sentenced to 2 years in the state pen, but due to his youth, he only served a short time, just about 4 months. Fisher was released from prison in February of 1871 at the age of 17. 8 months shy of his 18th birthday, he'd already served 4 months in prison. Damn. After prison, Fisher drifted on down south and, like so many other youths at the time, took to working cows and horses. Evidently, he had a knack for breaking horses. Also killing. Oh boy, turns out he had a real knack for killing. If you've learned anything from listening to this podcast, I hope it's the fact that Texas in the 1870s was extremely lawless. And what law there was tended to lean on the crooked side. Vigilante justice was the true law of the land. On one hand, this is understandable. You're a poor farmer or a rancher just trying to scrape by and make ends meet, and every so often a bunch of thieves run off with your horses or your dang milk cow. Eventually, you're going to say enough's enough and team up with other small outfits, form a posse, and take matters into your own hands. I get that. But mob justice never ends well. It's messy and innocent men die with no due process. This is the situation young King Fisher found himself in South Texas. Bandits from both sides of the border were terrorizing the law-abiding ranchers and homesteaders just trying to make a living. So vigilante groups were formed to take care of the bandits. And it was such a group that young King Fisher would join. As tends to be the case with these vigilante groups, they soon started committing crimes themselves. So it's only natural that before too long, Fisher found himself running with a large gang of thieves, doing the exact same thing he was pretending to try to stop as a vigilante. Keep in mind, we're talking about 1871-72. King was still a teenager at this point. Not even 20 years old when he started making a name for himself as somebody that was handy with a revolver. That devil's right hand. And not only could he handle a firearm, but he liked fancy ones. He started sporting ivory-handled Colts, and as time went on, his attire became just as flashy as his pistols. One Texas Ranger once described him as wearing an ornamented Mexican sombrero, a black Mexican jacket embroidered with gold, a crimson sash and boots, and 2 silver-plated, ivory-handled revolvers swinging from his belt. Another Ranger noted that Fisher was decked out in a beaver hat with a solid gold hatband in the shape of a rattlesnake, a silk shirt with a bandana around his throat, a pair of chaps made from the skin of a tiger he allegedly killed at a circus, and a brace of silver-plated, ivory-handled 6-guns. Oh, and he also wore bells on his spurs, because the normal jingle-jangle of spurs just sometimes ain't enough. And just in case you're wondering if you're imagining things, yes, you did hear me say that King had chaps made from the skin of a damn Bengal tiger. So, just to sum it all up, bedazzled sombrero, bedazzled jacket, gold rattlesnake hatband, red sash, orange tiger stripe chaps, and bells on his spurs. It's like if that cowboy from the Village People looked in the mirror one day and was like, I don't think I look gay enough. How can I turn it up a notch? But whatever, man. That was King Fisher. That was just his style, part of his swag. And he wasn't a big man either, only 5'9" and 135 pounds. But you'd be making a mistake if you were to confuse that outer man with the inner. For instance, he got into an argument one day with members of his own gang over how they were divvying up some stolen loot. One of them, a Mexican gentleman, went for a gun, but Fisher was either faster or more accurate because he dropped the guy dead, along with the man's 3 friends. And from then on, King was the undisputed leader of the gang, him and his Tiger Chaps. Who's the Tiger King now, bitch? Story goes that over the next few months, he killed 7 more Mexican bandits. Not a bad body count for somebody barely old enough to shave. Sometime in 1872, young King bought a ranch on Pendencia Creek, close to the Mexican border in DeMitt County, Texas. It was this ranch that he used as a headquarter of sorts for his gang's illegal activities. This area was known as the Nueces Strip, a lawless land line between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. And for a long time, neither Texan nor Mexican authorities paid much attention to what went on there. And what went on was a whole lot of not giving a damn about the law. Listen now, Mr. Kansas law dog. Law don't go around here, savvy. And King Fisher wasn't shy when it came to letting people know this was his territory. He placed a large sign on the road leading to the ranch that read, "This is King Fisher's road. Take the other one." It is important to note that he mostly committed his legal activities against the Mexicans and on the other side of the river. Not always, but mostly. For as long as anyone could remember, the Texans raided into Mexico and made off with livestock, and the Mexicans crossed the river and did the same to the Texans. Worse things did happen. Women were raped, men were killed. But by and large, there was a whole lot of cattle stealing going on. Think about Lonesome Dove. Remember what Call and Gus did when they decided to raise that herd to take to Montana? They crossed the river and made off with stolen Mexican cattle. Every damn one of those cows they drove to Montana was stolen, and them being respected lawmen. Now, I know Lonesome Dove is a work of fiction, but the fact is a whole bunch of skinny cattle spent their entire lives crossing back and forth over the Rio Grande in those days. The more the Texans raided Mexico, the more the Mexicans would, in return, raid Texas. And on it went. This caused problems for the Texas Rangers who were trying to keep the peace there on the border. And they didn't much appreciate this young cocky kid with the fancy pistols crossing the river and stirring up trouble. Sometimes, though, the Texan and Mexican outlaws would work together, if it was mutually beneficial. King was rumored to have had an agreement with future Mexican President Porfirio Diaz. Fisher would trade stolen Mexican cattle to Diaz in exchange for stolen Texas cattle. Tit for tit, as Dwight Schrute of Schrute Farms once said. According to Texas Ranger Leander McNelly, at the height of King's reign, he ruled the country between Castroville and Eagle Pass, and that he had an army of at least 100 men. That's a pretty big deal. Basically, King Fisher controlled the entire area of Texas south and west of San Antonio, all the way to the Mexican border. Fisher and his men did and took what they wanted and ruled by fear and intimidation. He got into it one day with a guy named William Donovan and ended up shooting the man dead. Not too long after that, he shot and killed 3 more men when he allegedly caught them stealing his horses. No doubt horses he himself had stolen from somebody else. Fisher's reign wouldn't last unopposed forever, though. Eventually, the Rangers had no choice but to intervene. He was arrested many times, but none of the charges would ever stick, partly due to the fact that nobody was willing to testify against him. He once boasted, quote, "You could not persuade a man in this whole country to testify against King Fisher or any of his clan." This was troublesome, not only because justice wasn't being served, but also because Fisher was now talking about himself in the third person, and that's never a good sign. He wasn't lying, though. At this point, he had been brought up on 6 separate murder charges and 2 charges of horse theft, and not a single one of these ended with him being convicted. They were all dismissed. Eventually, King and Ranger McNelly came to a gentleman's agreement, a come-to-Jesus moment, if you will. One source said that the Ranger captain gave Fisher quite a stern talking to one day, and Leander McNelly wasn't somebody he fucked with, that's for sure. A veteran of the Civil War and commander of the Frontier Battalion of Texas Rangers, McNelly also operated a special force of Texas Rangers in the Nueces Strip, and did not give 2 shits about illegally crossing the border to dispense the law. His law. And he enforced his law his way. And believe it or not, Fisher did straighten up a little and started actually doing legitimate ranch work. He even got hitched, marrying a young lady named Sarah Vivian in the spring of '76. The newly married and possibly reformed Fisher then opened up another ranch, this one in Maverick County, not far from Eagle Pass. He had violence in him, though. To very loosely paraphrase Legends of the Fall, King had that bear's voice deep inside of him, growling low. Sometimes the bear was hibernating. Sometimes that motherfucker woke up. As it did in 1878 when King got into an argument with 4 vaqueros. Fisher clubbed one of the men in the head with a branding iron, and when a second one drew his pistol, King went for his and shot the man first. He then spun around and shot 2 other men dead. 2 men who weren't doing anything, just sitting on the fence, watching the fight. In 1879, King Fisher accidentally shot himself in the leg. That's always fun. No word on how he did this, if it went off in his holster or if he was just fucking around being stupid or what. I had a negligent discharge myself once. No, not that kind of discharge. I'm talking about the kind that happens with a pistol. And I don't call them accidental discharges. That gun's not going to go off on its own. Something has to pull the trigger. And in my case, it was my finger. Listen to how stupid I am, y'all. I had been hunting, and for whatever reason, I had my pistol on me. In a holster, but with one in the chamber. I came back to camp, removed my pistol from the holster, racked the slide back to eject the round out of the chamber, and then I removed the magazine. Did you hear what I just said? I removed the magazine after I racked the slide. I then released the trigger and put a hole the size of a 9mm hollow point through the roof of my dad's camper trailer. I was in a hurry thinking about something else and just absentmindedly did things all back-asswards. Obviously, I should have removed the magazine first. Thank God I at least had the pistol pointed up when I released the trigger. Even though I did something ridiculously stupid, I still had the business end of the gun pointed in a safe direction. So yeah, I get it. If you spend enough time around guns, eventually accidents are going to happen. Or negligence. Kingfisher likely carried a gun every day of his life. It just so happened that on one of those days, he slipped up and got a nice scar out of the ordeal. Once he stopped his bandit ways, he did what many other outlaws of the Old West did. Started working the other side of the fence, enforcing the law instead of breaking it. In 1883, he became acting sheriff and tax collector of Uvalde County. It was in this capacity that he confronted the Hanahan brothers, Tom and Jim, who were suspected of robbing a stagecoach. Fisher tracked the brothers to their ranch in nearby Real County, and the Hanahans resisted, which led to gunplay. King shot and killed Tom and arrested Jim. Sometime around then, Fisher was asked by a reporter how many men he had killed over the course of his life. His reply was 37, not counting Mexicans. The implication being among some Texans at the time that killing a mere Mexican was so easy that it wasn't worth bragging about. And I would bet good money that number 37 is highly inflated. King was a killer, there's no doubt about that. But none of these guys ever killed the amount of men they claimed to have killed. And from what I can tell, most of the killings the King took part in were killings of Mexicans, the ones he claimed not to count. Also, just a quick side note, all these counties I mentioned, Dimmitt County, Maverick County, Real, Uvalde, and in 1880, before he was sheriff, he's listed on the census living in Zavala County. These counties are all located there in the Nueces Strip, and they're all bordering each other. So it's not like he was just traveling all over Texas. From 1872 all the way up to his death, Fisher's area of operation, both as an outlaw and a lawman, was that South Texas area on or near the border with Mexico. According to at least one account I found, Fisher owned a saloon around this same time, called the Sunset Saloon. And I really like what the fictional Al Swearingen on HBO's Deadwood said about saloons. As a base of operations, you cannot beat a fucking saloon. And that's another thing you see with a lot of these Old West guys, particularly the lawmen. Many of them owned or were part owners or worked for a saloon. Wild Bill, Bill Tillman, Bat Masterson, Wyatt Earp, of course, and a little someone named Ben Thompson, whom King Fisher just happened to meet up with one fateful day in 1884. Not sure how the two initially met. I found one account that stated King Fisher had previously been arrested in Austin, where Thompson worked, for gambling. He was also arrested there in 1876 with Ben Thompson and some other men and charged with murder, but they were soon released. Ben Thompson deserves his own episode. Very interesting guy. Born in England in 1843, Thompson's family immigrated to the States and settled in Texas when he was still a young boy. He joined up with the Confederate Army and served in the 2nd Texas Cavalry. Got wounded during the Battle of Galveston and saw heavy fighting during the Battle of La Force Crossing. After the war, Ben headed down Mexico way and served under Emperor Maximilian, fighting against Mexican revolutionaries. He then did a stint in Huntsville prison after he severely beat his brother-in-law, whom he found out was abusing his sister, Ben's wife, while he was off in Mexico. By 1870, Thompson was in Abilene, Kansas, operating the Bull's Head Saloon with Phil Coe. I mentioned these guys and the Bull's Head Saloon way back in my John Wesley Hardin episode. It seems that Thompson and Coe butted heads with the good citizens of Abilene, as well as the town marshal Wild Bill Hickok, even to the point of trying to goad Hardin into killing Hickok. Phil Coe and Hickok's beef would eventually turn deadly, with Coe coming up with the short end of that stick. Soon thereafter, Ben Thompson befriended Bat Masterson, and the two would hire on to help protect the Santa Fe Railroad and their little war against the Rio Grande Railroad. I talked about this little dust-up briefly in episode 22 of Bloody Beaver Podcast on Bat Masterson. I also mentioned it on my recent Arkansas Dave episode. Lots of famous or infamous guys did get involved in that little railroad spat. Ben eventually headed to Austin, Texas, where he opened up another saloon, the Iron Front Saloon. Got into a gunfight and came out on top. I'm kind of glossing over Thompson's various gunfights just because this is an episode on King Fisher, but still, the dude did not shy away from confrontation. And just like Fisher, he knew how to handle himself in a fight. At least well enough to serve in 2 wars, to survive all those rough cow towns and fight alongside guys like Bat Masterson. Thompson eventually became a lawman there in Austin. The city marshal, to be precise. But Ben liked to get around, liked to spend time in San Antonio. And it was while in San Antonio in 1881 that he got into yet another gunfight. This time it was with the owner of the Vaudeville Variety Theater, Jack Harris, who Ben killed. He just flat out did not like theater owners. He had previously killed Mark Wilson, the owner of the Capitol Theater in Austin, several years prior. Anyway, Thompson was tried for murder after killing Jack Harris, and he was acquitted, as often happened back in those days. But Jack Harris had a business partner named Ben Foster, who wouldn't just forgive and forget when it came to Thompson killing his friend. When Kingfisher headed to Austin in 1884, part of his duties as a tax collector of Uvalde County was delivering an annual tax report to the state's capital, he ran into his old acquaintance Ben Thompson. And Ben convinced Fisher to make a quick trip with him to San Antonio. Maybe have a few drinks, see the sights. A bro date. Y'all ever have a bro date? Just you and one of your guy friends? Y'all bored and go to the movies together? Doesn't that feel weird? You can't go at night because, you're not a couple. So you go during the day. Maybe even leave a seat open between y'all so nobody gets any ideas. Just two dudes, totally secure in who they are, going to the movies together because they're friends. Not a big deal, people. No, actually, Kingfisher joined Ben in this trip to San Antonio, hoping to help him effect some sort of a reconciliation with Foster. Time to bury that hatchet. I think this is at least one of the versions. I can't help but wonder if bringing Fisher along wasn't some sort of a intimidation tactic. Was Ben Thompson really trying to make peace, or was he trying to muscle his way in, maybe push Foster out? I don't know. Supposedly, Thompson was hitting the bottle pretty hard at this point in his life. Word is that he was no longer in his prime. And on that short train ride to San Antonio, Thompson was said to have been in a foul mood. When he and King arrived, they hit up the Turner Hall Opera House first, probably had a few more drinks, maybe enjoyed some cigars, and then they headed on over to the Vaudeville Theater, that same theater whose owner, Ben Thompson, had killed 3 years prior. The killing that Ben Foster was still stewing over. So let's set the stage here. Yeah, get it? Because they were in a theater, set the stage? No, seriously though, let's set the stage. Kingfisher and Ben Thompson head upstairs to a theater box to have a sit down with a guy named Billy Sims. They're joined by a local lawman named Jacob Coy. But Joe Foster is still refusing to speak with the men. All of a sudden, Kingfisher notices that something ain't right. Maybe it was a nervous twitch on someone's face, maybe a fleeting glance, or maybe it was that sixth sense, that Wild West spidey sense tingling. His insides telling him that trouble was afoot. Whatever it was too late. Before King could react, Jacob Coy and Billy Sims quickly stepped aside as gunfire erupted from another theater box, riddling both Fisher and Thompson with bullets. It was a setup, an ambush. Ben Thompson died almost instantly. As soon as he fell, either Coy or Foster, now Foster shows up, ran up and finished him off with a bullet to the head. Kingfisher wouldn't die so easy though. This Texas gunman was shot 13 times, but still managed to fire off a round, wounding the so-called lawman Coy, crippling that crooked cop for life. Maybe. Coy was shot and crippled for life, but it's not verified whether or not it was Fisher who fired the bullet. He did get a shot off, but there is a possibility that in all the chaos, Coy caught a round from one of the ambushers. Friendly fire. During the confusion of the fight, Foster accidentally shot himself in the leg, which later had to be amputated. He died soon after the surgery. Ah, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. John Kingfisher found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, wound up dead at the tender age of 31. Died with his boots on. Even though Ben Thompson wasn't very popular in San Antonio, there was a public outcry after the ambush. The people wanted a grand jury indictment for all involved, but nothing ever happened. Officials in San Antonio didn't show much interest, and things just sort of fizzled. Kingfisher's body was brought back to his ranch where, legend has it, that he was buried in his full splendor, tiger chaps and all. Over 40 years later, his body was exhumed and moved to the Pioneer Cemetery in Uvalde County, Texas, where it rests to this day. He left behind a grieving widow and 4 daughters. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Vivian Fisher, would live a lot longer, though. She passed away in 1946 at the age of 89. Ain't that something? 89 years old in 1946, so she was born in 1857. That means in her lifetime, she witnessed the Civil War, a frontier dominated by nomadic hunter-gatherers, was married to an Old West gunfighter, saw the invention of the telephone, electricity, radios, indoor plumbing, airplanes, the atomic bomb, television sets. She saw World War I and World War II, all in her lifetime. Wow, that's amazing to me. And that makes me wonder what our great-great-grandkids will say about us, Are we living through historical events that'll make them go, wow? It may not seem like it when you're living through it, but things are happening fast. I mean, look at what all's happened in just the last 12 months. We've seen Australia engulfed in wildfires. People started selling their left nut just to get a taste of one of those Popeyes spicy chicken sandwiches. Remember that? We almost went to war with Iran and China. Then the coronavirus hit and everybody started hoarding toilet paper, all because some guy in Wuhan decided to eat a damn bat. The president of the United States got impeached, and the prime minister of the UK, who has the same haircut as the president of the United States, broke up with the European Union. Kobe Bryant died, and then we found out Harvey Weinstein doesn't have a penis, and now he's in prison with Bill Cosby and R. Kelly. We also found out that Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, Jimmy Buffett, and fucking Stephen Hawking all visited Epstein's creepy pedophile island, along with a whole bunch of other rich and powerful people. And somehow, Epstein killed himself while on suicide watch, when the guards were asleep and the cameras weren't working. George Floyd got murdered by a bad cop, and rich white girls everywhere reacted by burning down Starbucks and refusing to shave their underarms. But not before a bunch of boomers got mad about not being able to get haircuts and took to the streets with their damn AR-15s. We've got an election coming up, and both candidates are old rich white guys who spend all their time arguing about black people. The current president says he's done more for black people than any other president, including Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves. The former vice president, who wants to be the future president, said the current president is the first racist president we've ever had, even though we've had previous presidents who owned actual slaves. Meanwhile, black people are over here just being like, hey, leave us the fuck alone. And everybody's scared about what to say nowadays because we can't keep track of all the stuff we're not supposed to say because we don't want to get canceled. All lives matter, but you're not allowed to say that. And if you do say it, it means you don't believe that black lives matter. Even though you do believe that black lives matter because you fucking think all lives matter. But you can't say it because everybody's lost their damn mind. Mr. Peanut died, and in our collective outrage, we canceled Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, and the Washington Redskins. Sarah Palin saying Baby Got Back, while Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin, that bitch, became household names. The Pentagon. The fucking Pentagon released a video footage of UFOs and basically admitted that aliens exist, and we didn't give a fuck because murder hornets were invading the country. The stock market crashed, you probably got laid off, and if you didn't, you're working from home and day drinking during your Zoom conference. Everybody's day drinking, except for me, of course, because I'm the only dumbass that decided to quit drinking during a global pandemic. Not that it really matters because all the AA meetings are shut down because of the pandemic. But at least we're not dealing with a swarm of locusts like they are over there in Africa right now. If you're lucky, you got a retarded kid that's making more money on TikTok than you make on unemployment, but you better cash in on that quick because TikTok's getting canceled soon too. Just like school got canceled. Just like the Olympics got canceled. Football got canceled. Bill and Ted came out with a new movie. The governor of New York's pierced nipples went viral. Kanye West announced he's running for president. And Elon Musk, our generation's Einstein, believes this whole thing is a computer simulation. And to top it all off, 2 10th graders in India just discovered an asteroid that's shifting its orbit and heading straight towards Earth. It was all too much for Charlie Daniels, Little Richard, and Kenny Rogers. They checked the fuck out and joined Johnny, Hank, George, and Waylon up there in heaven. Pretty sure the only thing keeping Willie here is the fact that Jesus still hasn't legalized weed. Yet. We're working on it. I just talked to him yesterday. So I don't know. Maybe King Fisher's wife, seeing all that history unfold in her lifetime, isn't so special after all. I miss the simpler times. Remember back when we were all united in our love for Harambe? Hashtag RIP Harambe. By the way, I was just kidding about Jesus not legalizing weed. I don't think he cares whether or not you smoke a joint. Anyway, back to the podcast. Remember the Hanahan brothers that Fisher went after, arresting Jim and killing Tom? Well, after King's death, the Hanahan's mother would visit Fisher's grave every single year on the anniversary of Tom's death, build a fire on King's grave, and dance around it. I'm not making that up. That's a true story. Hell hath no fury, indeed. And that's about all I have on King Fisher. I do have a correction to make. On the episode I did on Jim Miller, episode number 16, I mentioned Jim killing his grandparents. While he did kill his brother-in-law, it looks like there's no evidence that he actually killed his grandparents as well. Supposedly, that story didn't start circulating until after Miller's death, and not sure where it originated. But his grandparents didn't even live in Texas when Miller was a kid. So there you have it. I was wrong. Poo-poo on me. Got to get better at fact-checking. Also, on episode number 4 of this podcast, I mentioned that I did not believe that Brushy Bill Roberts was really Billy the Kid. Made a very strong argument against him being the kid. And I was wrong about that too. There was a recent DNA analysis conducted by Caltech's forensics department, comparing samples taken from Brushy Bill Roberts and Billy's mother, Catherine Antrim. The results were just released, and it was a match. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. Of course there wasn't a DNA analysis. And of course Brushy Bill wasn't Billy the Kid. Bigfoot doesn't exist either. All right, y'all, that's it for this week. Thanks as always for listening. And if you like what you're hearing, go ahead and subscribe. You can hit me up at bloodybeaverpodcast@gmail.com, or you can hit the contact button on my website, www.bloodybeaver.com. Go ahead and give that website a visit anyway. I gave it a makeover. Tell me what you think. And I hope y'all have better luck than I did searching online for a pair of assless tiger print chaps to buy. I found tiger print skirts, some leggings, but no tiger chaps. Dang it. All right, later, y'all.